Ida for refusing to babysit for my siblings anymore and telling my family they can't use me as free childcare and treat me like shit for being an unwanted pregnancy. I, a boy of 16 years, have always felt the weight of isolation within my own family, a heavy shroud I never asked to bear but somehow became my burden from the moment I entered this world. My family, consisting of my parents and 4 much older siblings, saw my existence not as a blessing or even a mundane occurrence but as an unwanted complication, an intrusion on the life they had carefully planned and believed was set in stone. My arrival was not met with joy or even begrudging acceptance. Instead, it became a mark of failure, a sign of plans gone awry, something they never tired of reminding me about through words, actions, and silence that cut deeper than any outright insult ever could. My father had undergone a vasectomy, a decision made when my parents decided 4 children were enough. They had carved out their perfect little family, balancing the challenges of parenthood with the prospect of returning to a life less consumed by the needs of small children. It was a choice rooted in practicality, a way to regain a sense of control over their lives. They had done their time, raised their brood, and were now looking forward to a future that involved more freedom and fewer sleepless nights. But 6 years after that final medical step to ensure no more children would disrupt their well-laid plans, fate had other ideas. My mother, unexpectedly and much to her dismay, discovered she was pregnant again. I wasn't part of the plan, and my presence was never wrapped in the glow of excitement or anticipation. The discovery came too late for what my mother would have preferred. She was already 13 weeks along. Too far along to turn back without complications or raising eyebrows. Too far along for her to erase what she would later refer to as a mistake in hushed conversations, thinking I wouldn't hear but forgetting that children notice everything, especially the things that hurt. I would learn, over time, that if she had discovered my existence earlier, she would have terminated the pregnancy without hesitation. That knowledge carved itself into my identity before I even understood what it truly meant. I was the child who shouldn't have been born, the reminder of something that went wrong. And that knowledge became the lens through which I viewed every interaction with my family. My siblings, all more than a decade older than me, were close-knit in a way I never experienced. They were bonded by shared experiences and memories I was never part of, growing up as a unit with no gaps between them. They had been old enough to understand that their parents were done having kids and had accepted that the family structure was complete. When I came along, I disrupted that balance. I was a symbol of something unfinished, an anomaly they didn't want to acknowledge. And they never hesitated to make me feel the weight of that disruption. I wasn't their baby brother in any real sense of the word. I wasn't the one they doted on, cared for, or protected. I wasn't the one they included in inside jokes or childhood stories. To them, I was always the outsider, the one who didn't belong in their family narrative. The age gap alone was enough to create a divide, but it wasn't just about the years between us. It was about the resentment they harbored for my very existence. They had grown up with parents who were fully present and involved, parents who had the energy and patience to raise a family. But by the time I was born, my parents were weary, and their patience had worn thin. My siblings saw the difference and, perhaps on some level, resented me for getting a version of our parents they never knew, one that was tired and distant, not because of me as a person but because of the simple fact that I came when they believed they were done. Their resentment manifested in cruel, casual remarks that they passed off as jokes, not realizing, or maybe not caring, that their words pierced me deeper than they could imagine. They called me Mom and Dad's mistake, a phrase that became synonymous with my identity. It wasn't just a one-off comment made in a moment of frustration, it became a recurring theme, something they repeated over and over again, as if to cement my place in the family as the unwanted one. They referred to me as the oops, a label that stripped away any sense of belonging I might have tried to find. I became less of a person and more of an inconvenience, a joke they shared without regard for how it made me feel. Holidays, which should have been a time for family bonding, became a stark reminder of my isolation. My siblings would return home for Christmas, their arrivals greeted with excitement and warmth. They would laugh, exchange stories, and revel in the comfort of familiarity. But I was never part of those moments. I was the invisible presence, the one they barely acknowledged. They didn't see me as part of the family dynamic. I was an afterthought, someone they could easily overlook without any pang of guilt or remorse. They would bring gifts for each other, carefully chosen with thought and care, wrapped in festive paper and topped with bows. The living room would be filled with the sound of tearing paper and exclamations of joy as they revealed what they had received. But there was never a gift for me. Not even a token gesture to make me feel included. I sat on the sidelines, watching as they celebrated each other, a silent witness to a tradition that excluded me. It wasn't just the lack of gifts that hurt, it was the message behind it. They didn't see me as someone worth considering. I wasn't part of their celebrations. I wasn't part of their family. As a child, I tried to understand why I was treated differently. I tried to rationalize their behavior, convincing myself that maybe I wasn't good enough, that there was something inherently wrong with me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about who I was. It was about what I represented, an interruption in their lives, a reminder of something they wanted to forget. And that realization was a burden I carried with me every day. Even as I grew older, the dynamic didn't change. If anything, it became more pronounced. My siblings built lives of their own, had families, and established their own traditions. I watched from the sidelines as they continued to bond, their connections growing stronger while I remained on the outside. They had each other, and I had no one. The gap between us was never bridged, and the resentment they harbored never faded. They saw me as the embodiment of something unwanted, a mistake that never should have happened. And no matter how hard I tried to find my place within the family, I was always met with the same coldness, the same indifference that told me I didn't belong. I became accustomed to the loneliness, the feeling of being an outsider in my own home. I learned to navigate the silences, the dismissive comments, and the outright exclusion. I learned to lower my expectations, to stop hoping for moments of connection that would never come. But no matter how much I tried to protect myself, the hurt never truly went away. It lingered, a constant ache that reminded me of my place in the family or lack thereof. And through it all, I carried the knowledge that my existence was never wanted. That I was the child who came too late, the one who disrupted their carefully planned lives. It was a truth I couldn't escape, no matter how much I tried to push it aside. It was a truth that shaped who I was, coloring every interaction, every relationship, and every moment of my life. In a family that should have been my safe haven, I found only isolation. In a home that should have been filled with warmth and love, I found only coldness and indifference. And in a world that should have embraced me for who I was, I learned to navigate the shadows, always feeling like I didn't belong. Because I was the mistake. The oops. The one they never wanted. And no matter how much time passed, that truth remained. My parents made it painfully clear that I was never a priority in their lives. I wasn't a cherished youngest child, doted on and protected. No, I was an inconvenience, a reminder of something they hadn't planned for, and every interaction with them reflected that bitter truth. From the time I was a young boy, they treated me like a burden they never wanted to bear, a weight that grew heavier with each passing day. They didn't see me as someone to nurture or care for. They saw me as an interruption in their routine, a noise they wished would fade into the background. When I was little, I sought comfort from my parents in the way most children do, in small, innocent requests for attention, in moments of vulnerability when all I wanted was reassurance from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I would ask for bedtime stories, eager to hear their voices guide me through adventures and tales before falling asleep. But instead of warmth and patience, I was met with sighs of irritation and rolled eyes. They would brush me off, telling me I was old enough to read my own stories, that they were too tired or busy to waste time on something so trivial. I learned quickly that asking for their time was a mistake, a surefire way to earn their frustration rather than their affection. Even something as simple as wanting to sit with them would provoke exasperation. I would wander into the living room, hoping to curl up beside my mom or dad, craving the physical closeness that made me feel safe and loved. But my presence was always an annoyance. They would shift uncomfortably, sigh loudly, and ask me why I couldn't just go to my room and play quietly by myself. My desire for connection was met with a wall of cold detachment. If I dared to ask for a hug, something that should have been given freely and without hesitation, they would act as though I had made an unreasonable demand. Their arms would wrap around me stiffly, with none of the warmth I yearned for, and they would mutter things like, "There, happy now? Can I get back to what I was doing?" It wasn't a gesture of love, it was a begrudging concession, something they did to make me go away. I learned early on that my feelings didn't matter to them. When I had a bad day, whether it was because I struggled at school, had a fight with a friend, or simply felt overwhelmed by the world, I wanted to share my thoughts with my parents. I wanted them to listen, to offer words of comfort, to make me feel like I wasn't alone. But every time I tried to open up, I was met with indifference. They would glance at me briefly, their eyes glazed over with disinterest, before dismissing me with a curt, "We're too busy right now." It didn't matter what they were doing, watching TV, scrolling on their phones, or talking to each other about mundane topics. It was always more important than me. My emotions were an inconvenience, something they didn't want to deal with. And so, I stopped trying to share. I bottled up my feelings, knowing they would only be ignored or brushed aside. Mealtimes, which should have been a time for family bonding, became yet another painful reminder of my exclusion. Most of the time, they would eat without me. I would come home from school or from being out with friends, only to find the dinner table cleared, the dishes washed, and no one waiting for me. They didn't call me to join them, didn't wait for me to sit down. They ate together, as a family that didn't seem to include me. On rare occasions, when I did eat with them, the atmosphere was cold and detached. There was no lively conversation, no warmth or laughter. I felt like an outsider even in those moments, sitting quietly at the table, knowing that my presence was tolerated but not welcomed. The worst, though, were the family dinners they had when my siblings visited. I would come home to find my parents and siblings gathered around the table, their voices rising and falling in animated conversation, laughter ringing out as they shared stories and memories. They never told me these dinners were happening. No one invited me to join them. I would stand in the doorway, watching them from a distance, feeling the sting of exclusion settle deep in my chest. Sometimes they would notice me and give me a brief, awkward nod before returning to their conversation, making it clear that I wasn't welcome. Other times, they wouldn't acknowledge me at all, continuing their meal as if I wasn't even there. These weren't just casual dinners at home. They went out to restaurants together, too. They would dress up, pile into cars, and head out for a meal, leaving me behind without a second thought. I would hear them talking about their plans, making reservations, discussing which restaurant to go to, and never once did they mention me. I was invisible to them in those moments. They enjoyed their family time, creating memories and sharing experiences, while I sat alone at home, wondering what it would be like to be part of those outings. I imagined what it would feel like to sit at a restaurant table with them, to be included in the conversation, to feel like I belonged. But that wasn't my reality. My reality was isolation, exclusion, and a growing sense of resentment. Even on holidays, when families are supposed to come together, the pattern remained the same. My siblings would return home, their arrival celebrated with hugs and excitement. They would bring gifts for each other, exchange stories about their lives, and bask in the comfort of being surrounded by family. But I was never part of that circle. I watched from the sidelines as they celebrated each other, the warmth and joy of the season never extending to me. They didn't bring gifts for me. They didn't ask about my life or include me in their conversations. I was a ghost in my own home, present but unseen. I remember one Christmas in particular. I had been looking forward to it for weeks, hoping that maybe this time, things would be different. Maybe this time, they would remember that I existed. But when the day came, I sat alone in my room, listening to the sounds of laughter and celebration from downstairs. They were exchanging gifts, their voices filled with excitement and gratitude. I waited, hoping someone would call me down, but no one did. Eventually, I ventured downstairs, hoping to catch a glimpse of the festivities. But when I entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter quieted, and they all glanced at me with a mixture of discomfort and annoyance. My mom, seeing me standing there, said, "Oh, you're here. We thought you were in your room." And that was it. No invitation to join them. No acknowledgement of my presence beyond that brief comment. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do, before turning and walking back to my room. The door closed behind me, shutting out the sounds of their celebration, and I sat on my bed, feeling the familiar ache of loneliness settle in my chest. It wasn't just about the holidays or the dinners or the hugs I never received. It was about the message behind all of it, a message that told me, over and over again, that I didn't belong. That I was an afterthought, a mistake they wished they could erase. My family was supposed to be my safe haven, the place where I felt loved and accepted. But instead, it became the source of my deepest pain, a constant reminder that I was unwanted and unloved. As I grew older, that pain hardened into resentment. I stopped trying to seek their attention or approval. I stopped hoping for moments of connection that would never come. But the ache never fully went away. It lingered, a shadow that followed me through every stage of my life, reminding me of what I had lost or, perhaps, what I had never truly had to begin with. As time went on, my siblings' lives progressed in ways that most would expect. They graduated, started careers, got married, and eventually began having kids of their own. Their lives became full of milestones, celebrations, and responsibilities, all things that seemed so distant and unreachable to me. But instead of being included in their new family dynamics as an uncle to be cherished and valued, I was thrust into a role that no one asked me if I wanted, the default babysitter. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was small, subtle requests. A sibling would show up with their toddler in tow, asking me to keep an eye on them for just a few minutes while they ran an errand or had a quick conversation with my parents. I didn't mind at first. I was young, eager to please, and desperate for any sign that my presence mattered, even if it was just to make their lives a little easier. But those quick moments turned into hours. The requests turned into demands. Soon enough, it became expected that any time my siblings needed someone to watch their kids, I would be the one to do it whether I agreed to it or not. If we all vacationed together, the pattern was the same. While everyone else enjoyed the trip, exploring new places, eating out, and creating memories together, I was left behind with the kids. They didn't frame it as a request or offer it as an opportunity to bond with my nieces and nephews. It was a given. I was there to serve a purpose, not to be part of the family fun. I would sit in the hotel room or rental house, surrounded by toys and snacks, while they went out for family dinners, beach outings, or sightseeing tours. They never thought to invite me along or suggest that we take turns watching the kids so I could have some fun too. I wasn't there to be part of the experience, I was there to work. And even when we weren't on vacation, the babysitting never stopped. My siblings would drop their kids off at our house without warning, leaving me responsible for them without so much as a hello. They'd walk in, greet my parents, and casually announce that I'd be watching the kids for the afternoon while they ran errands or went out for dinner. My parents never consulted me, never asked if I had plans or if I was okay with it. They simply nodded their approval, as if I were some hired help at their disposal. I would hear them chatting in the living room, laughing and catching up, while I was left to entertain toddlers and change diapers. I wasn't part of their adult conversations, wasn't included in their lives beyond my usefulness as free childcare. There were no boundaries, no consideration for my time or feelings. I was expected to drop whatever I was doing, whether it was homework, personal plans, or simply taking time for myself and step into the role they had assigned me. And if I ever dared to protest, I was met with irritation and dismissal. "It's just a couple of hours," they would say. "You're good with kids." But it wasn't just a couple of hours. It was my whole life, slowly being consumed by their expectations, by the unspoken understanding that my role in the family was to serve their needs, not to have needs of my own. It didn't matter if I had other things going on. It didn't matter if I was tired or overwhelmed. It didn't even matter if I liked kids or wanted to be around them. None of it mattered, because I wasn't seen as a person with my own desires and boundaries. I was a convenience. A tool. Someone to be used when needed and ignored when not. I know that people hearing my story might wonder if there's some secret lurking in my family's history, some hidden reason why I was treated differently. They might speculate that I'm not truly my parents' biological child, that maybe I'm the result of an affair or a scandal they don't want to acknowledge. But there's no mystery here. I am 100% their biological child. It's been confirmed in every way possible. There's no doubt about it. I carry both my parents' features, their mannerisms, their quirks. I am undeniably theirs, yet I've always been treated like an outsider. The truth is far simpler and, in some ways, far more painful. I wasn't a secret or a scandal. I was a mistaken, unplanned pregnancy that disrupted their lives in ways they never forgave me for. My existence wasn't a joyous surprise, it was an inconvenience they had to endure. My parents had been done with raising children. They had made their decision, taken steps to ensure there would be no more kids. But life had other plans, and I came along when they were ready to move on from the exhausting years of parenting young children. They never wanted to go through it all again, and they made sure I knew it. My siblings never wanted me either. By the time I was born, they were teenagers or adults, already forming their own lives and identities. They had grown up in a household where the family dynamic was established, where they were the children and the attention was focused on them. I was an intruder in their world, someone who disrupted the balance they had grown comfortable with. I wasn't their baby brother in the way siblings often are. I was a reminder of something they didn't want to remember, that their parents weren't perfect, that plans could go awry, that life could change in ways they couldn't control. I tried to speak to my parents about how I felt. I tried to talk to my siblings, to explain the hurt I carried with me every day. But every time I tried to open up, I was brushed aside, dismissed as if my feelings didn't matter. My parents would wave me off, saying things like, "You're being too sensitive," or "We've done the best we could." My siblings would laugh it off, treating my pain as if it were a joke, something not worth taking seriously. They never once stopped to consider how their words and actions affected me. They never once apologized or tried to make things right. I thought about writing a letter, pouring my heart out onto paper in the hopes that maybe, just maybe, they would read it and finally understand. But every time I considered it, the same thought stopped me: what's the point? What's the point of bearing my soul to people who have shown time and time again that they don't care? What's the point of putting my deepest feelings into words only to have them ignored or thrown away? I couldn't bring myself to do it. The fear of that rejection, of seeing my letter tossed in the trash without a second glance, was too much to bear. And so, I carried my pain in silence. I held it close, a constant ache in my chest that never fully went away. I learned to navigate my family's indifference, to lower my expectations and protect myself from the hurt that came from hoping for more. But no matter how hard I tried to guard my heart, the ache remained. It was a part of me, as much a part of my identity as my name or my face. I wasn't just the youngest child in my family. I was the mistake, the afterthought, the burden they wished they didn't have to carry. And that truth shaped every interaction, every relationship, every moment of my life. It was a shadow that followed me everywhere I went, a reminder that I wasn't wanted, that I wasn't loved the way I deserved to be. And no matter how much I tried to push it away, it never left me. The breaking point wasn't sudden. It was the slow, grinding culmination of years of neglect, isolation, and being treated like I didn't belong. But eventually, it became too much. I could no longer pretend that everything was fine or that I was okay with being used and discarded by people who were supposed to be my family. I reached a place where the pain I felt from staying silent outweighed the fear of confrontation, and I knew that something had to change. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. It started small. I began spending more time at my girlfriend's house. Her family was warm and welcoming in ways I had never experienced before. They treated me like I mattered, like I was someone worth knowing, worth listening to. They invited me to sit at their dinner table, asked me about my day, and actually cared about the answers I gave. They didn't brush me off or make me feel like an outsider. For the first time in my life, I felt what it was like to be part of a family that valued me. And once I experienced that, it became impossible to go back to the cold, dismissive environment of my own home. I started staying over at my girlfriend's house more often. I didn't tell my parents where I was going, and honestly, I don't think they cared enough to ask. I would leave when I felt the babysitting requests coming. If I caught wind of a family dinner or a gathering where I knew I'd be expected to watch my nieces and nephews, I made sure I wasn't around. It wasn't hard to avoid them. They rarely involved me in their plans, except when they needed something from me. But eventually, my absence became too noticeable to ignore. The turning point came on a Saturday evening. My siblings decided they wanted to have a family night out, dinner, drinks, the whole thing, and, as always, they assumed I would be the one to watch the kids. They didn't ask. They never asked. They simply dropped the kids off at my parents' house and left, fully expecting me to show up and take over. But this time, I wasn't there. I was at my girlfriend's house, enjoying a peaceful evening with people who actually cared about me. I had made a choice to put myself first for once, to stop sacrificing my time and energy for people who treated me like a servant. When my mom realized I wasn't home, she called me, her voice sharp and impatient. There was no greeting, no concern for where I was or how I was doing. She got straight to the point. "Where are you? You need to come home. The kids are here." I could hear the underlying tone of authority in her voice, the assumption that I would obey without question. But I didn't feel the usual pang of guilt or obligation. I didn't feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me like I used to. Instead, I felt calm, steady, resolute. "I'm not coming home," I said. My voice didn't waver. "I'm not babysitting for you anymore." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then my mom's voice returned, colder this time. "What are you talking about? You've always watched the kids. This is what family does." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "No, this is what you do. You use me because it's convenient. You don't care about me. You just care about what I can do for you. But I'm done with it. I'm not going to be your free babysitter anymore, and I'm not going to let you keep treating me like shit for being an unwanted pregnancy. I didn't ask to be born. You made that choice, not me. So stop punishing me for something I had no control over." The words tumbled out, years of pent-up frustration and hurt finally finding their voice. I had held it all in for so long, afraid to speak my truth, but in that moment, I realized that I couldn't carry the burden any longer. I wasn't responsible for their choices or their resentment. I wasn't going to let their bitterness define me anymore. My mom's reaction wasn't pretty. She sputtered, her words tripping over each other as she tried to regain control of the conversation. "That's not fair," she said, her voice rising with anger. "You're part of this family, and families help each other." "No," I interrupted, my tone firm. "Families support each other. They care about each other. They don't use someone until they break. You've never treated me like part of the family. I've been nothing but a convenience to all of you." "Well, not anymore." She tried to argue, but I wasn't listening anymore. I hung up, cutting off the conversation before she could say anything else. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't feel regret. For the first time in my life, I had stood up for myself. I had drawn a line in the sand and refused to let them cross it. The fallout wasn't immediate, but it came. My parents were furious. My siblings were livid. They couldn't believe that I had dared to stand up to them, to break the unspoken rule that I would always be there to serve their needs. They called me selfish, ungrateful, disrespectful. They said I was causing unnecessary drama, that I was overreacting. But their words didn't have the same power over me anymore. I didn't feel the same ache of rejection or the desperate need for their approval. I had found my voice, and I wasn't going to let them silence me again. I knew they were pissed off, but I stood my ground. I stopped answering their calls. I stopped showing up when they expected me to. I made it clear that I wasn't going to be their doormat anymore. And with every boundary I set, I felt a little stronger, a little freer. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I questioned myself, moments when I wondered if I was being too harsh or if I should try to mend things. But then I remembered all the times they had dismissed me, all the times they had used me without a second thought, and I reminded myself that I deserved better. I deserved to be treated with respect, to have my own life and my own boundaries. In the end, I don't think they'll ever fully understand what they did to me or why I made the choices I did. They're too wrapped up in their own narratives, too convinced that they were justified in their actions. But that's not my burden to carry anymore. I've let go of the need for their validation. I've let go of the hope that they'll change. Now, I'm focused on the people who do care about me. My girlfriend, her family. They've shown me what love and acceptance really look like. They've shown me that I'm not a mistake, not a burden, but someone worth caring for. And that's the family I've chosen to invest my time and energy in. So, am I the asshole for standing up to my family? For refusing to let them continue treating me like an unwanted afterthought? Maybe they think I am. Maybe they'll always see me as the problem, the one who broke the unspoken rules. But I don't care anymore. I've spent too much of my life bending over backward for people who never appreciated me. I'm done with that chapter of my life. I'm choosing myself now. And that's the best decision I've ever made.